And go.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us on our new show, Journeys of Challenge. We started this show as a way to highlight various stories that are challenging and try to study them as opportunities for growth, real life stories, real people, and real opportunities for growth. So tonight we're honored to have a special guest, Alex Silverstein, special agent of the FBI, a dear friend that we know from the community for many years, been a liaison to the law enforcement community. And so we've been wearing two hats, a law enforcement hat, but also a member of the Jewish community. And over the years, as I've gotten to know you, there have been so many questions I have like bottled up inside, bottled up. And I've been so curious because I think you're the only FBI agent I personally know. I mean, I can't say that about rabbis. I know more than one rabbi.
You're the first Orthodox rabbi that I've become friends with, so okay. it's a match set. Okay. I really appreciate the opportunity to come here tonight and speak with you. Thank you.
Okay, so it's an honor for us to host you, and an honor to have a friendship with you as well. So the first burning question I've kind of restrained myself for asking for many, many years now, but I'll just blurt it out and get it out in the open. But before I ask the question, I do have to preface this by saying I am a rabbi, so I have to kind of start it off with a rule in rabbinical school, start off with a joke.
Of course.
Yeah. So although my kids would dispute that, and they would say I haven't said anything funny in 10 years, but there is a story about the first Jewish president. You know, we've never had a Jewish president yet, but, you know, one day I'm sure there'll be a Jewish president, and he's very excited about his upcoming inauguration. And he calls up his mom. He says, "Mom, I'm going to have my inauguration, my swearing-in ceremony. I'd like to invite you for this swearing-in ceremony." And his mom says, "Well, I don't know if I can come, Hyman, because I don't have anything to wear." He goes, "Mom, I'm becoming president. I'll get you a seamstress to make you something." And then she calls him up the next day, "I don't know if I can come because, you know, I only eat kosher food." He goes, "Mom, I'm becoming president. We'll find you something to eat." And the next day she calls him up and she says, "Hyman," he had a real name that he went by, but she always called him Hyman, of course.
Of course.
Yeah. And she said, "Hyman, I don't know how to get there." He goes, "Mom, I'm becoming president. We'll send Air Force One to pick you up." So finally she shows up at the inauguration, and there's a lot of pomp and ceremony, and at the climax of the inauguration, the president-elect at the time, he picks up his hand and puts his hand over the Bible, and as he's doing that, his mother, who's just a few feet away, nudges someone and says, "See that my son over there?" And the person thought she's like brimming with nachas, pride. And the person said, "Yeah." He goes, "Well, his brother's a doctor." So it's been like an old Jewish thing. My son the doctor, my son the lawyer. I don't know if I've ever heard like my son the FBI agent.
It's true that I am the black sheep of the family.
The black sheep of the family.
And much to both my parents' chagrin that I went into law enforcement. I knew at a very young age that I wanted to be in public service. My favorite show growing up was Emergency back in the 70s. And I know this dates me terribly, but back in the 70s, it was a show about Los Angeles County firefighter paramedics. And I said, that's what I want to do. And both my parents said, out of the question, you're going to college. And so I did. I went to college and I went to law school, and both my parents, they were just filled with nachas. They were going to have a Jewish lawyer. I began dating my now wife, who thought she was going to marry a nice Jewish lawyer. And sure enough, what do? I go into the FBI and become a federal law enforcement officer. It's been definitely a long, strange trip, as they say. I had I got a job in college with a local prosecutor's office. And I really thought that that was my path. I was going to be a lawyer. I was going to be a prosecutor and that's what they thought too. They said, well, we're going to give you a job as an investigator, but that's just for you to go to school, and you go to law school at night. We're gonna employ you during the day. And along the way, I caught the bug, and I got it bad. And I remember the moment when I really came to the decision that law enforcement was my calling. It was in 1993, and I was standing in the criminal investigations division of the Prince George's County Police. That was the county that I was working in as an investigator, and I stood there in that office, and it just
Prince George's is where?
Yeah, in Maryland. It's right outside of Washington, D.C. And I was just struck with the feeling that this is where I belong, and this is what I should be doing. And it is I'm an exceptionally spiritual person, while not quite as religious as perhaps my wife would like me to be, but I do pay attention to the unspoken word. And there's been moments in my life, and that was one of them, where there was something calling me, and I followed it.
So it's been a calling for you.
Absolutely. It's been this month is 26 years of being an FBI special agent. So it's and it is really I've never regretted a day of it. There's been some bad days, but I've never regretted going into law enforcement. Let's put it that way.
What would you say is the most rewarding part of being an FBI agent? What would you say is the most challenging part?
So the most rewarding part of being an FBI agent is actually those tangible times where you're making a positive impact on somebody's life. One of the most rewarding times that easily comes to mind was about 12 years ago. My partner and I took down a major violent gang case here in Jacksonville. And as part of the arrests and searches, we recovered well over a dozen firearms. I think it was closer to 20 firearms, several pieces of body armor. These were really bad people. They were committing armed robberies. They had done kidnappings. They dealt drugs. And as I received the reports of all of these illegal firearms and bulletproof vests and other robbery tools like masks and things, all that kept coming to mind, and for weeks afterwards, is that I know we've saved somebody's life. By arresting these people. We have stopped them from, for sure, hurting and possibly killing someone. And that's definitely one of the most rewarding experiences. The other side of it, though, when you talk about some of the challenging, is that when you come in contact with people who are really hurting, and knowing that there's sometimes there's absolutely nothing that you can do for them, and sometimes it's very acute, where you come across a victim of violent crime, and no matter what you do, they die right in front of you. Sometimes it's a little less painful, but no less acute, when you come in contact with somebody who's been defrauded of hundreds of thousands of dollars, and that turns out that's their life savings. They'll have no more money, and knowing that there's really very little to nothing that I can do to get that money back, or to restore their life back to the way it was. And that's despite all of this power, if you will, as a law enforcement officer and a federal law enforcement officer, there are just some things that we can't fix. And that's very, very challenging.
Was there ever a time during your nearly 30-year career that the challenge was so intense or significant that you thought that this is too much for me?
There have been times that I've needed to get help. In the days, weeks after September 11th, I was profoundly affected, and it really, really shook me. And I was living in Maryland, and I actually turned to my rabbi for help, and he went a long way to helping me. I don't know if I ever contemplated quitting, but I knew that it was so bad that I wasn't sleeping, and things were as you can imagine in 2001, the end of 2001, in the Washington D.C. area, it was very tense between September 11th and the anthrax attacks. It was very, very tense, and I had some trouble dealing with that.
Sure, absolutely. I just want to mention to our listeners, and thank you to all the listeners that are tuning in, that we do have the opportunity, if you're watching online, to share comments, and perhaps we'll be able to share them with Alex later on in the program. But I wanted to kind of pivot to a different discussion. First of all, I want to say thank you for your service, for your patriotism. You're a great American, and we sleep comfortably at night because of the great service that you and your colleagues do. So
thank you. Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
It's I don't know if you guys hear it enough.
I say frequently, thanks aren't necessary, but they're always appreciated. So I appreciate that very much.
We really appreciate I one time had the opportunity actually to visit the FBI headquarters here in Jacksonville, and it's a very impressive building, and met many of your colleagues. So just wanted to, from our community to you and your colleagues, wanted to express my gratitude. But I didn't want to kind of pivot to a different area, because besides being an FBI agent, which of course you are as a professional, over the years, the capacity that I know you in, you've been a liaison to us in the Jewish community, and at least the way we see you, I'm sure you have a whole different portfolio. I never even knew you were in charge of weapons of mass destruction, which is a whole other topic, but maybe we'll leave that for a future episode. But so you've been a great consultant to us and a resource for issues of security into the Jewish community. So over the years, I've been in Jacksonville now since 2004, and over the years we've had certain alerts and different concerns here and there. But in the last few years, not necessarily Jacksonville itself, but on the national level, we've seen things which, to the best of my knowledge, we haven't seen in decades, perhaps ever. The synagogue shooting in Pittsburgh, the synagogue shooting in Chabad of San Diego. And people are becoming more and more unsettled here on the congregational level. Security is a big topic amongst the membership. Comes up almost every rabbi that I know has a security committee, as we do in our synagogue. And the general feeling, I would say, amongst our community is, and this is not just our community in Jacksonville, it's kind of hard to put, to say this with any definitiveness, but is that we're less secure than we have been perhaps in decades, the last few years. I just want to kind of get your general sense of that. Is that accurate? Is that just emotion? Are we? I just wanted to get your sense. Are we less secure? Is this the new normal? And if you can just comment on that.
Absolutely. First of all, I will say that I don't think that we're less secure. In fact, I would say that with technology and communication, I would probably say that the Jewish community is more secure than it was in decades past. Just the connectivity alone amongst the Jewish communities, that if something happens, that we're all aware of it, and we can all learn from lessons, and we can all build on what other people have done. The information age has made that much easier and much more practicable to share information amongst the Jewish community. That's the good news. The bad news is the real issue is also that because of the information age, we're far more aware of when anti-Semitic acts occur, whether it's rhetoric or it's actual violence. So I don't believe that we're any less secure. I think we're more aware of when these things happen. Unfortunately, the threat is always there. It is this. There's been anti-Semitism since, as they say, since Moses wore short pants. So the truth is it's always been there. We're more aware of it now, and that can instill fear. And there are many people in the information age that profit on people clicking and watching, and they want you to watch and maybe be afraid, because if you're afraid, then you keep watching. Then they repeat bad news over and over again. And I think that may make us more afraid, but that's not necessarily based in what really happens. With technology that we have and the security cameras that we have and the connectivity with local law enforcement, state law enforcement, federal law enforcement, and the Jewish community, I actually believe that on a technical sense, we are more secure. We may not always feel it, and perception's reality, but I honestly believe that we are safe in our communities, generally speaking.
We do have a question that has come in. We have where Alan Siegel has asked that last Sunday an anti-Semitic banner was hung on the overpass at Emerson and I-95 South. Were you aware of it? And what is the proper response of the FBI law enforcement?
I was aware of it. As soon as I became aware of it, I contacted the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office, who did respond out there. But hate speech, no matter how distasteful it is still protected under the United States Constitution. We may not like it. We may not like what they have to say. And I think we can breathe a little easier that most of the people in this country don't like it either. But what we have to accept is that the freedom of speech means just that, and that people can say what they want to. And that's their constitutional right. And my job as a federal law enforcement officer is to support and defend the Constitution of the United States. That's the oath I took. I don't have to like it, but I have to defend people's constitutional rights. If I don't, it becomes a very, very slippery slope. When we start trying to regulate hate speech, it becomes a very slippery slope, because who then defines what hate speech is? Today, we say hate speech is anti-Semitism. What happens if tomorrow hate speech becomes anybody who wears a blue shirt? Are we going to start prosecuting people because we've decided that people who wear blue shirts, that's now illegal speech? Do we now start prosecuting those people? We have to let people say what they want to say. We don't have to agree with it. We have to let them say it.
Right. And that's a tough thing on an emotional level to understand the hate speech part. But I guess I would just follow up on that question. Is my understanding of that hate speech is permitted under the U.S. Constitution and U.S. law, but incitement to violence is not.
Correct.
So what's the general rule of thumb saying that this is hate speech, but it's not incitement to violence?
So I'm glad you brought that up, because there's actually a Supreme Court case that actually defines, or it comes as close as the Supreme Court's going to talk about that. And what they talk about is unprotected speech is something that is a true threat, and the speech has to have an intent to intimidate. It cannot be in a political arena. There has to be not necessarily a true threat to cause harm, but a true threat to make someone fear from harm. So someone saying that a true threat would be, I'm going to kill you, that is a true threat, provided that I have, it's not in saying in jest, that the person who's hearing that truly feels intimidated by me. But someone who says, in one of the court cases they refer back to is a case in the 1960s where a war protesters who was protesting the draft said in an anti-war Vietnam War rally, he said, if they put a rifle in my hands, the first person I'm going to put in the crosshairs is Lyndon Johnson. Now, threatening the president is a felony, and that's what the person was charged with. However, his conviction was vacated, and the Supreme Court said that what he was saying was conditional if they put a rifle in my hands. And it was said in a political arena. So it does become, that's it. Unfortunately, I'm an attorney, so there's no simple answer for this. But for speech to be regulated, it has to be something along the lines of a true threat. This is a bank robbery. I'm hijacking this plane. I'm going to kill you. That is unprotected speech. Saying that everybody who wears blue shirts is a knucklehead is.
I noticed you used the blue shirt example because you're wearing a blue shirt tonight.
It's politically safe. It's politically safe.
Okay.
But it's I use it as an example that hate's not okay. It isn't okay. And I will tell you that almost every law enforcement officer who's out there dislikes the people who are just espouse hate philosophies. But that doesn't make it illegal. If we could arrest people for being knuckleheads, the jails would be full and the streets would be empty. But unfortunately, it's not a crime.
What about the synagogues?
Well,
okay,
my seat would be empty.
We'll leave that unanswered.
Yes, but it's not a crime to express your opinion, no matter what your opinion is. It's not a crime. If you stand on the sidewalk and express your opinion, that's your constitutional. And if you read the intent of the original framers, that's your God-given right to express your opinion. Now, if you come on private property and express your opinion, that becomes a little different. Then we can start regulating it. The internet is considered to be public property. So you say what you want to say on the internet. It's very easy to say what you want to say on the internet.
Right.
You can even interview an FBI agent on the internet.
So I've heard.
That's
So I've heard. By the way, your version of that the source anti-Semitism began when Moses wore short pants. The Orthodox Jewish version is when Moses wore long pants.
Oh, okay.
Just want to clarify that for the record. I just want to ask you, when we're talking about the question that we got was an act of hate, facing the Jewish community. So there's no shortage of groups that dislike us. No shortage of groups that dislike us. From they said, the old saying was, the fascists say that we're communists, the communists say that we're fascists. Before there was a state of Israel, everyone hated us because we were the only nation that didn't have a state. Now they hate us because we have a state. What did we do to the Palestinians? So we get it from all sides. That being said, I feel like there are shifts. Historically, maybe hundreds of years ago, we were being massacred by fundamentalist Christians. That's not happening anymore. So there are shifts. So I would like to say, here we are in 2022, United States of America today. Is there any stronger threat? The three main groups that come to mind, although there may be more. There's groups from the far right. There's groups on the far left. There's jihadist groups. When the law enforcement community is looking at the Jewish community and saying, like, who are the groups that are making us most vulnerable? Is there any one particular group that is the most concerning?
Well, without turning this into right versus left, I will say that unfortunately Jews tend to be the target of opportunity. People who espouse the violent Antifa ideology, blame Jews for global capitalism, which they believe is a root of their evil. Those who espouse a white supremacy or the replacement theory, they also think the Jews are behind a conspiracy to replace white people. The jihadists, the violent extremist population there, blame Jews for Israel, for the United States invading Afghanistan and Iraq, for putting U.S. soldiers on Saudi Arabian soil. One thing I've always wondered is, if Jews have all this power, why do my kids go to public school? I don't understand that. I wish we had this kind of power. But at the heart of it, I think what happens is when people are disaffected, they never want to blame themselves. No one ever wants to be the author of their own demise. So it has to be someone else's fault. And sometimes you've got movements, not just in this country, but in other countries, that if you have people who are very poor and they're very disaffected, you want to cast blame. It's always, casting blame is far easier than accepting responsibility. As human beings, it's almost what we're conditioned to do. If something has gone wrong, if I have a flat tire, it's not my fault. I got a defective tire.
Who can we blame?
Who can we blame for this? And it is sometimes in the world, it's less about solving problems and more about affixing blame. So fixing blame for some of these people who are disaffected is on the people who are different. And the Jewish population, we are different. We're different from Christians. We're different from Hindus. We're different from Muslims. We've always been different. And that's part of the reason why we have traditionally formed our own community. Sometimes it was not our choice to form our own community. When we get forced into ghettos, we form our own community. We've drawn strength from that. But unfortunately, that also makes us targets. So I think that it's not one particular group. I think it's the disaffected who want to find blame.
Got it. So there's not a particular threat necessarily coming from one demographic more than the other.
No, that's the good news. The bad news is it's kind of coming from everywhere.
Right.
Because there's never any shortage of madness. I don't want to paint too dark a picture. I mean, the truth is that, and a lot of what we're talking about here is the extreme. The extreme is not the norm. This doesn't happen every day. It might happen every day in some people's minds, but the fact of the matter is, we're sitting here today. You have a beautiful office. You have a beautiful synagogue. We came here of our own free will. We'll go home, Kenahara. We'll go home and we'll have our lives. We're going to live our lives. We're going to have we'll raise children. We'll have, God willing, we're going to have grandchildren someday, and we're going to live our lives. Perhaps in our history, that hasn't always been a certainty. So, while yes, we're beset on all sides, all the disaffected know no political allegiance. That's the bad news. The good news is maybe not as bad as some folks on the internet want you to believe.
Right. So I guess as a follow-up comment and question, I would say you mentioned that when there's problems, people look to assign blame versus taking responsibility. And, there's no shortage of historical examples. I mean, one glaring example that we're all familiar with is in the aftermath of World War I. Germany was suffering greatly. And Hitler said, the Juden sind unser Unglück. The Jews are the source of our suffering. And because the Germans were, so whenever there's been economic downturn, it's been a worrying situation for the Jews, which has been on my mind quite a bit lately. Inflation is reached record highs that we haven't seen here in decades here in this country, and this is not a interview on economics.
Sure.
And I'm not a scholar in economics, but it seems that the government, the Federal Reserve, has its limits of what it can do to control the situation.
Certainly.
And we may be in for tough times ahead, tougher times than we would like to imagine even. So I'm thinking about that versus a concurrent, like, who do we blame? Who do we blame? So I guess my question to you is, as the economy is, worsening, we just saw the August reports now, inflation is still record high with food prices and so on and so forth. Do you see any uptick in anti-Semitism from where you are, or not necessarily?
Well, I certainly have seen an uptick in anti-Semitic rhetoric. Again, the internet is a great leveler. Anybody can be heard in the information age. So certainly, and it also becomes very easy to repeat something. We copy and paste.
Share the link.
So it becomes a lot easier now in the 21st century to share information. So we have seen this rise in anti-Semitic rhetoric. In terms of actual violence, violent crime has trended up over the last couple of years. It is something that we are of course concerned about. And so between the FBI and our federal, state, and local partners, it is something that we pay very close attention to. And the FBI surges resources where they are needed in these areas where violence tends to spring up. We'll send FBI agents to different cities as the conditions warrant. But while we're talking about a historical perspective, and I know that the August numbers came out and they weren't great, and the interest rates are up. The one thing to remember is that about 45 years ago, economic conditions were about the same here in this country. Interest rates were going up, inflation was going up. Cities, New York City in particular, were in pretty bad shape. The 1970s, the Bronx was burning. And the World Series was played in New York, and that was a famous quote: "The Bronx is burning," because constantly buildings were being set on fire. And we're still here. It's 45 years later or so, and we're still here because the American people are far more resilient, and the American economy is far more resilient than doomsayers would expect you to be. Bet long on the American people. Bet long on the economy. Short term, yes. I'm not an economist, but short term, I wouldn't pull my money out. I'm not going to retire because of the way the market's going. But I bet long on the United States economy. I bet long on the United States people. What happened? In the 1970s, things were bad. People were saying, I can remember as a child growing up, the news was always bad. Now you only got news once a day, so it wasn't quite that bad. But now in the 24-hour news cycle, the news is always bad, and people were worried the United States is going to rip itself apart. We got to 200 years, we had a good run, and this is the end of the American experiment. 45 years later, we're still here. This nation is still a strong nation. Our constitutional rights are still guaranteed. They're still protected. And what it will take, and sometimes like great ocean-going vessels, sometimes it takes time to turn the ship. But I truly believe that we'll reach a point where we'll we will right the ship in terms of the economy, in terms of crime. I think things will get better. I'm not saying that they're great right now. I don't think they're all that bad either. But I think economically, I think in terms of crime, I bet long on the United States.
I'm glad to hear your optimism. I guess I hope you're not lonely on the internet.
I have this capability that I scroll. If I see posts I don't like, I just keep right on going.
Oh, wow. So I want to kind of pivot to something else, and that is that, we've been discussing your perspective on law enforcement and anti-Semitism, and I just want to kind of focus in on you more personally. You wear many hats in life. You have your own professional life, your personal life, and I guess one of our biggest fears as American Jews is, we don't want to be accused of dual loyalty, dual loyalty. And I was just reading this, talking about history. One of the influential members of President Roosevelt's cabinet, Morgenthau, was very reluctant to speak up on behalf of the Jews in Europe, even though he was getting reports about the carnage of the Holocaust, because he felt, I'm Jewish, so on and so forth. How are they going to view me? And it's, we can't judge anybody, of course, but I just want to ask you, because I also, there's been stories. I'm not sure if these are the outlier stories, or this is maybe not so much outliers, maybe approaching the norm. Have you ever been either accused of having dual loyalty, or have you felt, that you maybe issue dual loyalty? Maybe sometimes I know people in the national security arena have trouble going to Israel, visiting Israel, because, they're either in the military and so on and so forth, and they're restricted from going. So I'm not sure if that ever applied to you or not, but if you can just comment on the general, I'm curious to hear yours.
So I've never been accused of dual loyalty. In fact, the times that I have spoken up on behalf of the Jewish community within my own organization, and being here in Jacksonville, I do that frequently. My opinions are in fact welcomed by executive management. I have never had any issues with any assistant special agent in charge or special agent in charge, especially here in Jacksonville, when I've spoken up and brought issues to their attention and they've addressed them. And in fact, the leadership of the FBI here and in the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office has leaned on both me and my colleague in the Sheriff's Office, Jeff Moore, to act as that bridge between law enforcement and the Jewish community. And so there's never been an issue of that. I was actually sent to Israel by the FBI 16 years ago to go and learn from them when I was assigned to FBI headquarters. And so there's never been any issue with that. Now, there are some countries that, because I have in my passport, I had an Israeli entry and exit stamp that I couldn't go to. But that's actually, most Americans can't travel to those countries if they've got Israeli stamps in their passport. That being said, there have been, on more than a few occasions, times where I've felt isolated because I'm a Jew in law enforcement. It is a very, very singular position, being a Jew in law enforcement. Some places there are more than others. If I were a police officer or an FBI agent in New York City, clearly there are a lot of Jews that are in law enforcement there. That's just on sheer numbers. But for a long time here in Jacksonville, I was the only Jewish FBI agent here. Even when I was an FBI agent in Washington, D.C., I was only one of 5 FBI agents in a field office of 600. So I did suffer from anti-Semitic remarks. And when I came down here to Jacksonville, I also have had experiences with anti-Semitism in the job, but not being accused of dual loyalty. I think it's more out of ignorance and insensitivity, and sometimes misplaced good intent, very misplaced good intent. But I've certainly have felt it. I've certainly felt it throughout my life as a Jew, both here in Florida and even before when I lived in the DC area. I'm not sure that there's really any Jew that's immune from it, from anti-Semitism. It's all a matter of what you do with it. Do you let it stop you? Does it galvanize you to action? Do you persevere in the face of it? I choose to persevere in the face of it. Not only is there never any shortage of madness, there's also no shortage of stupidity. And all we can do is, as you have said, is be the light against the darkness. So I light a candle against the darkness.
Very good. Have you ever felt that there's been anti-Semitism within the law enforcement infrastructure that's held back your career?
No, not at all. That being said, the infrastructure of the FBI is a little bit different than perhaps some other agencies. Generally to promote, there has to be also a willingness to move. That's what has held back my career is my love of the city of Jacksonville.
Oh, really? I
didn't want to leave. And so I had originally come down to Jacksonville on a career path as a supervisor. And my wife and my children fell in love with this area. I'm very much in love with my wife. And so she wanted to stay. So we stayed. And so I said, I'm foregoing any further promotion so we could stay in Jacksonville.
So basically you're saying you could have been FBI Director General had it not been
I don't know.
You could have been the Christopher Wray.
I don't know about that.
You could have taken over James Comey.
I don't know about that. Well, the director of the FBI and I have something in common. We're both at the highest level of the FBI that we're ever going to be. So but certainly I could, if I had stayed on that career path, certainly I could have promoted and gone back to Washington and gone out to another field office. But life is long, and you have to evaluate the full picture. And when we came to a decision point, my wife and I talked about it. At first, before we moved to Jacksonville, my wife said, "Where you go, we go." And then we came to Jacksonville, and she said, "Where you go, you can come visit, because we're not leaving." And in truth, living in Jacksonville has been the best thing for us and our families. I don't regret that.
Maybe we should put you on the Jacksonville promotional videos.
Come to Jacksonville, end your career.
The marketing team,
maybe that's not the best.
It sounds like your career is doing not bad.
So in the FBI, as you promote, you have less to do with cases. I'm not saying anything out of school. Anybody who has promoted within the FBI, you tend to do more of the leadership role and the management role, and you have less to do with cases. When I stepped out of management, I went back to working actual cases. And remember, as we got started, I said that some of the most rewarding things that I've done have involved that tangible moment when you can actually help someone. And had I not stepped out of management, a lot of those moments would not have been possible. And so I don't regret it for a minute. I've had quite the career in the 13 years since I stepped down. I've arrested bank robbers. I've arrested murderers. I've stopped a violent gang. I've gotten individuals to confess to dozens of bank robberies over multiple states. And then as they were going out the door to be sent to prison shook my hand and thanked me for treating them fairly. And you don't get that opportunity if you're a supervisor. That's only the agent, the guy.
If you're in the trenches.
If you're in the trenches, that's where you're making a difference.
Right. So here we are. We're in 2022. The United States of America is very polarized. We just experienced a very traumatic presidential election and its aftermath. Without getting into all the politics, most likely the upcoming presidential election will be very divisive as well. The country's very divided. Maybe after listening to you talking about the information age, makes things just more polarized, and could be that it is. But the people are just very, very tense. With red versus blue, Trump versus Biden, Republicans versus Democrats. Roe v. Wade was taken back this past year. There's certain norms that that have been in place. That just, even for example, we used to have an election, and then it was a quiet season, and the campaign started close, and I feel like there's very little quiet season. I mean, I don't want to talk politics, but where I want to get with this is that we're very polarized, and when we're very polarized, there it's not good for the country. But besides that, it could lead to violence, which it has in certain cases. And my question is coming back to the Jewish community: does that make us more vulnerable? I mean, there was a story here. I'll just give you an example. A story here right before the last presidential election of a congregant. And this is very anecdotal. I'm not going to suggest that this is reflective of the norm. Maybe no. I don't even. Should I say it?
It's your show.
Well, it's my show. So okay. So anyways, a congregant goes to like a dollar store here, and he was accosted by somebody and said, if this particular presidential candidate, I won't say the name, but I don't think we're talking about the libertarian candidate.
Probably not.
If this particular candidate loses, we know it's the Jews' fault, and we know where you guys are, and we know how to find you. And he was very shaken up by that. Again, very anecdotal. Nothing happened, but I guess my general question is, we had a January 6th. It was very traumatic for the country. Does this make the Jewish community more vulnerable in a period when there's greater instability?
Well, without getting into the politics of it, I think that, again, when people are very angry, they want to blame someone else's. It's someone else's fault. If your candidate loses, it couldn't possibly be because that person got less votes than the other person. It has to be someone else's fault. If I've lost my job, it couldn't possibly be my fault. It's because the wrong person was elected. Again, it becomes people who are unhappy assigning blame. And again, the Jewish population tends to be blamed for that. I think what we see is the effect of the echo chamber that the internet can be. When I was growing up, you got like I said, you got news. You got it once a day. You got it at you got the national news at 7:00. If you tuned at 6:00, you got the local news, and that was it. You got the newspaper the following morning, and that was your news. And if you didn't like what the news said, you maybe could try another network, but you better switch quickly because the news is going to be over at 8:00, and it was prime time. Now, if you don't like what's being reported on the news, whatever the news is, well, on the internet, you can go find what you want and you can listen to it and you can find people that are going to agree with you, no matter what your political party is, no matter what your ideology is. You will find people who are going to agree with you. Sometimes they're not always people. Sometimes they're bots. Sometimes it's going to be people who are trying to mislead you. But you will find people who will agree with you. And that can kind of whip people up. I'm angry, and all these other people out on the internet, they're angry too. Like I said, they may not be people. It might be one person who's using 4 or 5 different names, but they're angry too. So my anger is justified. Doesn't mean that they're right. There's never any shortage of madness. But I think what that does is, because the Jewish people are our own community, I think that we are the other in a lot of people's minds, and we can, in their minds, incorrectly, in my opinion, that we're to blame for their problems. I think, once again, I think bet long on the American people. I go back to the 70s. Watergate was a very Watergate, Vietnam, the civil rights movement was a very, very tumultuous time in the United States. People did not think we would survive. There was a presidential election that was decided. Maybe it wasn't the best person, but it was different than the other guy. And the economy faltered. Streets were in disrepair. And then the American people then voted in the right person and the right people. And they settled down, even though they had differences, they set about fixing their problems. And the American people set about fixing their problems. And it took a while. And the 80s was a period of economic rebuilding, and it wasn't all smooth sailing. But it ended. The 80s ended with the 90s with the beginning of a great deal of economic growth. Some of the fastest and most the strongest economic growth in the United States history, which lasted for, dip aside in 2008, which lasted for close to 30 years. That we're having a downturn now. Yeah, if you're trying to buy a house, you're trying to finance a car, this is a bad time to do that. And if you're walking around, and don't forget COVID, because COVID had a very dilatory effect on the economy. So if you're walking around some cities, yes, crime is up. Yes, it's not pretty on some of those streets. But bet long on the people of the United States to fix the problems. It may not be as quick as we like. And remember, in the internet age, everything's got to be done immediately, because everybody's watching. So these problems may not be fixed as fast as we might like them to be, but I feel very confident that they will eventually.
Right, we're the instant pot generation. We like things done right now, all immediately. We have no understanding of process. But just as a quick follow-up, when you say bet long on the American people, you said that a few times. You're including that. My understanding is including in that statement is bet long on the American Jewish experience in the United States as well.
Absolutely. Because here's one of the things that separates the 21st century from the 20th century. In parts of the 20th century, it was actually very chic to be anti-Semitic. In the city that my wife grew up in, there was a hotel that for years posted a sign on its beach: no dogs or Jews allowed. It was very, very chic in some communities to be anti-Semitic. It was very chic to have no Jews in a country club or no Jews at a particular hotel. In the 21st century, it isn't chic to hate. And we've seen that. While hate still goes on, there's never any shortage of madness or stupidity. So it's going to happen. But it's no longer chic. It's no longer accepted. Whether you agree with people being, canceled or not, that type of behavior, it's not tolerated anymore. Or it's not as tolerated as it once was. So and when acts of terror have befallen the Jewish people, the shooting in Pittsburgh, the shooting in San Diego, there is such an an outpouring of love from the rest of the country that it far eclipses the madness that befell those folks. To case in point, here in Jacksonville, in one of the communities that was leafleted with hate speech, shortly after all those leaflets happened, someone else went through the neighborhood and leafleted again. Instead of anti-Semitic messages, they were all messages of love. You are loved, you are accepted. And that person, whoever did it, went through and leafleted the same neighborhood. You are loved, you are accepted.
Oh, wow.
And in all the news coverage of that leafleting that's going on recently in this community, what you haven't seen is people saying, yeah, right on. That's right. That's the way it should be. That's right. The Jews are all to blame for that. No, the vast majority of this community thinks it's terrible. People can leaflet, people can say what they want to say, but I believe that most people in the United States are good at heart. Because if they weren't, we'd know. In Germany in the 1920s and the 1930s, the Nazis didn't come in and just start seizing Jews. The Nazis passed laws that were voted on by the country. The Nazis were elected in. That's not going to happen in the 21st century in the United States of America.
I appreciate your optimism, and I would love to end there. I would love to end there because there's a lot of anxiety, and we can always say, what about this and what about that? But we are approaching a new year, 5783. And our rabbis and our tradition has always taught us that a new year is always a new opportunity for the future. So I want to take this opportunity to wish you and your family a happy and sweet new year. And
Thank you.
Also want to thank you for everything you do for not just the general society, which you do, you and your colleagues, but also for the Jewish community. You've been such a valuable resource on the security front. And it's such a great peace of mind knowing that we have an ally at the highest levels and an advocate. So we really appreciate that. It makes all the difference in the world. So on behalf of a grateful community,
thank you very much. I appreciate that.
We say Lashana Tova Tikatevu.
Thank you.
May you be inscribed in the book of life and the book of peace, the book of good health, you and your family. And may this upcoming year, may God watch over us and allow you and your professional team to be successful in all your endeavors.
Thank you very much.
I want to thank you for coming on our show, and your insights were so filled with wisdom and great perspective. So most of all, I appreciate your optimism.
I will tell you, I will leave you with this. As I tell my children this, and as a paramedic, I would tell my patients this: worry when you see me worried. If I'm worried, then we got problems.
Does that ever happen?
Not really all that much. I'm a weapons of mass destruction guy, so if it's got to be pretty bad for me to be worried. But I'm not just an FBI agent. I'm also a member of the Jewish community. So if I'm worried, then we should all be worried. And I bet long on the United States. I bet long on this community.
Okay, so thank you so much for coming.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate it.